Chapter 4. Deny Yourself. In the 14th chapter in Luke, we are privileged to read a parable that Jesus told, illustrating this point. When you are invited by anyone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the best place, lest one more honorable than you be invited by him. And he who invited you and him come and say to you, "Give place to this man," and then you begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down in the lowest place, so that when he who invited you comes, he may say to you, "Friend, go up higher." Then you will have glory in the presence of those who sit at the table with you. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Luke 14, 8-11. Picture the following scene for a minute. A person comes to dinner and sits in the place of honor next to the head of the table and begins feasting. Then suddenly, the person for whom that seat was actually reserved arrives. How embarrassing! It is much easier to sit in the lowest place and let the master of the house invite you to a higher position. Jesus denied himself and chose the lowest place in all of his creation, and by doing so proved an unchanging principle of heaven. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Luke 14:11. Hebrews reinforces this fact. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Hebrews 12:2. Jesus despised, or literally set his mind against this shame and humiliation. He knew about the cross. He chose it for himself because of his love for you. When he came up from the water of his baptism, he looked to the cross. When he healed the 10 lepers and no one thanked him, he looked to the cross. He always knew what awaited him, the cross. That which is reserved for criminals, the cross, that terrible place of shame. He denied himself and had no concern or attachment to his own life. And now, because of the aforementioned principle, he sits exalted in the highest place of heaven. Jesus not only told us we must deny ourselves, but he showed us what it would look like. He made it very clear that if we want to be something, then we must become nothing. This is, of course, complete nonsense to the world around us, but not to those who look on from a heavenly perspective. The Lord knows that the door of earthly shame enters into the room of spiritual honor, while the door of earthly honor enters into the room of spiritual shame. Lack of perspective on this one issue has always held believers back and kept them from growing in their faith. The ability to deny oneself is one of the first characteristics to look for in a believer. Simply ask the question, are they unconcerned and unattached to themselves? If so, these are the ones whom God exalts. Soon they will be leading people to the Lord and saving souls. Their workplaces will be changed, their families will be transformed, and they will be walking in the power of God. Why? Because they are willing to deny themselves. Don't be discouraged if you are struggling with this right now. Remember, the most common argument recorded among the disciples wasn't who brought the bread. They did argue about that once. The most common argument was, who is the greatest? We can picture Peter arguing about how he had walked on water, while John would argue that Jesus always referred to him as the disciple he loved. In fact, there are at least 5 separate incidents where the disciples argue among themselves about who is the greatest, while in the very presence of the servant of all. Let's briefly look at one of the most shameful of these incidents. Now there was also a dispute among them as to which of them should be considered the greatest. Luke 22:24. Can you imagine? Even we don't go this far. We may be arrogant at times, but we probably never have an open argument about how great we are compared to each other. Can you imagine that kind of an argument going on in the middle of your church? Can you imagine arguing like this in front of Jesus? Jesus did not waste any time speaking the truth to them about who was actually the greatest. And he said to them, "The kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those who exercise authority over them are called benefactors." Luke 22:25. Benefactor is not an insult. It simply meant that they were recognized as someone who had money and power. But not so among you. On the contrary, he who is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he who governs as he who serves. Luke 22:26.
Thank you for listening to the audio version of His Final Words, a discipleship manual by Travis Hunt. This audiobook will continue in the following videos.